Welcome everyone to this week's Charla, the educational crisis during COVID-19. We are grateful for all of the Charla oradores and also the partnership of the American Federation of Teachers. We are deep in the summer of COVID-19, and parents are scrambling on how to keep their children engaged, but also trying to figure out how to bridge a disrupted spring educational cycle with an uncertain fall. The usual options to not only keep kids educated and entertained, but to offset this summer slide with activities like summer camps have been canceled or moved online rather than in person. The pressure is squarely on parents' shoulders who are also dealing with financial, health, mental health, relationships, and many other issues that we're facing every single day and have been for 4 or 5 months in addition to the educational crisis. According to the Brookings Institute, students lose up to 30% of their school year learning over the 2 months of summer break, with Latinos and African Americans at an even higher rate. Because of this pandemic, schools will have been out nearly 6 months, which means students, that summer slide just got 3 times worse, and that's if schools open back up for the fall semester, which is in doubt at the moment. So how much learning will students lose? And if the students do go back in the fall, it'll be online or some kind of a hybrid. It's all still up in the air, which is that mental anguish and anxiety being felt from this uncertainty by students, by parents, by teachers, by custodians, by administrators, counselors, bus drivers, pretty much everyone that's part of the educational ecosystem. On top of that, there is the issue of what we like to call at HHF the TechEdquity Gap, where minority and rural students are less likely to have adequate Wi-Fi or devices to be able to learn. That tech divide is even more critical than ever, and the inequities in education just got bigger. In an effort to address these issues, we have an amazing group of self-selected speakers from their point of view, and including as parents. These community charlas that we've been doing virtually are the Hispanic Heritage Foundation's weekly interaction led by self-selected members of our community sharing personal experiences, ideas, actions, and guidance in compelling and inspiring 5-minute presentations based on themes impacting our community, in this case, the educational crisis. Please feel free to use the chat feature freely to share your comments, your energy, your resources, to cheer our speakers on. But we also, if we have time, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end, so you can send questions in, but it'll depend on how much time we have left. This insidious pandemic continues to ravage our country at an even greater alarming rate in many parts of the country, and education has not been spared. According to a recent study, 82% of educators believe students were less conscientious than during the school year, and 22% of parents said their children spent less than an hour a day doing schoolwork, and I'm included in that. So where do we go from here? Make no mistake about it, we are deeply in an educational crisis. So let's get started. First up, we have Evelyn DeJesus, who is in New York. Evelyn is Executive Vice President at the American Federation of Teachers, and her presentation is titled, "Let's Not Forfeit Our Children's Future." Evelyn.
Thank you, Antonio. Muchas gracias. And thank you to the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for including me in this important charla. So as you hear, my name is Evelyn DeJesus, and I am the EVP of 1.7 million members of the American Federation of Teachers. And Antonio, you're so right. We are deep in an educational crisis, but the educational crisis is worse because we are in the middle of 3 other crises: a health crisis, an economic crisis, and a justice crisis. All of these have devastated Black and brown communities and exposed the deep inequities that have long existed in our community and society. Latino children, especially English language learners, have suffered disproportionately and inequitably from understaffed and poorly resourced schools, overcrowded classrooms, and even virtual ones in the richest country on the face of this earth. The lack of internet and capacity and bandwidth in our communities are not there. Millions of Latino parents are essential frontline workers in healthcare, as you said, agriculture, transportation, and maintenance. So they never, ever stop working. There is no maintenance, so there is no telecommuting for a home healthcare aide, a farm worker, a bus driver. So their children didn't have the support at home to help them keep up with their schooling. That's the student population that I worry about, that you worry about. We're seeing the opportunity gap for Latino students widen due to COVID-19. For the nation's 5 million English language learners, 80% of those 5 million speak Spanish. There's a much higher risk of falling behind during distant learning. According to the Latino Decision and Somos Healthcare report, 37% of Latino households have either no broadband internet connection or connect only through their phones. Now, imagine if you have 2 to 3 kids at home sharing a tablet or phone to get your homework done. In the education world, we've been talking about the digital divide from the very beginning of the digital world, and we are still talking about it today. In the richest country on earth, that is unconscionable. And now finally, the administration seems to have discovered that parents and communities need functioning public schools. So what are they doing? They're threatening to cut funding if they don't open. Can you imagine? Well, the federal government and certain governors may be willing to play it fast and loose when it comes to bars or breaches, and look where it's gotten them. But we at the UFT are not willing to play it fast and loose with our kids. Let's not forfeit our children's future. The AFT developed a comprehensive reopen plan based on science, guidance and from educators and healthcare experts, not on politics or wishful thinking. In this crisis so far, educators have stepped up to the plate. Let me give you some examples. Let's learn from the creative practices that have been deployed over the last 4 months. Let's scrap what hasn't worked and expand on what has been working. And here's what we have witnessed. The Austin Independent School District retrofitted its buses with Wi-Fi capabilities up to 200 feet and parked them strategically near the apartments and the neighborhoods with the highest internet needs. They also delivered Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots to children in grade 3 to 7. The Los Angeles Unified School District partnered with the Public Broadcasting Service to provide instruction through local television programming. This also happened in Albuquerque, as well as the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia region. On the AFT platform, sharemylesson.com, write that down, sharemylesson.com, which is free to every parent and everyone. We have a ton of materials specifically designed to help educators find resources and parents to find resources to support their ELS students. One of our webinars on distant learning and ELS has been viewed for more than 30,000 teachers. The AFT also co-founded colorincolorado.org with a PBS wetter in 2004. It becomes a #1 EL resource for educators and families of ELs. And because we know that children of color have experienced serious traumas during this crisis, as parents have lost their jobs and grandparents have lost their lives, we need to pay attention to students' mental and emotional health in these times. Peekskill, New York City Schools staff a warm line, like a hotline, staffed by social workers, counselors, and psychologists to help parents deal with the difficulties their children were experiencing. As we say in the AFT, we care, we fight, and we show up. So what about the schools in the fall? Here's what we think. Schools can and should reopen where the virus is not spiking, and they should reopen based on safety, equity, and science, not politics. Communities, families, and students need schools to open, but we can't give in to the false choice between doing the right thing, doing the right way, and ignoring health, safety, and equity because it's politically expedient to reopen quickly. We can't ignore CDC guidelines. We need to be guided by them. Schools need to set out clear guidelines, talk to parents and teachers, and work together to provide safe physical distancing, appropriate hand washing, adequate masks and PPE, and proper ventilation. As you know, many of our schools some classrooms don't have windows. How do we keep that air moving? No question, this will be difficult, but is it impossible? I don't think so. What's impossible is throwing up our hands, throwing open the school doors and telling teachers and kids good luck. What's impossible is thinking we can solve these problems with tweets and bullying from the White House instead of real money and real planning and respect from health professionals. And I want to say a word now directly to Latino parents. I know that many of you would rather not talk to teachers and principals and just let them do their jobs as experts. But here's the truth. Teachers and principals need you. We need you to advocate for your children. If you're concerned that your child isn't getting the education that they deserve, please call the local AFT, call their principal, call their PTA, PTO, anyone you can that can help you. Antonio knows how to get a hold of me. We're ready to help. You're not alone in this. We're together. Somos unidos. There are millions of Latino children in America, public schools, and when parents say what they want for their children, it changes things. It's how I got involved in the New York City school system. My daughter kept getting sick and found out that it was an asbestos issue. I was able to shut down the entire New York City school system because I cared about my kids and I talked and I advocate. That's what we need from you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And my last thing is the HEROES Act. If we have every senator, you call your senator on the HEROES Act, they are going on vacation. We can get that money and we can open up the schools with everything we need. Thank you. Thank you so much. Gracias.
And I love the passion, and you always want people that are leading in this space to have that passion along with the information. And I love how you put it, health, financial, and social justice crisis, because it is a triple threat there. So next up is my hermanito, Adan Gonzalez from Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas. Adan is the executive director and founder at Puede Network, and his presentation is La fuerza, esta en la unión. So if everybody could put their mics on mute, except for Adan. Adan, please let us know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony. I love you, and thank you for creating the opportunity to really raise the voice of our people. That being said, today is literally 10 years when I sat on the curb of McDonald's hacking into their Wi-Fi with a borrowed laptop, applying to colleges and scholarships that I couldn't even pronounce their name. I would say that I was hungry, literally. I remember those nights meant that I had to help my dad skip meals so we could afford the rent at home. I remember even as a 7-year-old with my older brother, we used to work La Pulga. Nos íbamos a vender drinks, sodas to help our parents buy our school uniforms. That being said, in Dallas, my story is not unique. Actually, in the last 15 years, there has been an increase in poverty of over 42%. In South Oak Cliff, where I'm from, only 6% of adults have a bachelor's degree. Only 61% of a community have a high school diploma. And in South Oak Cliff, 83% of people live in poverty, either are Black or Hispanic. Today, there's obviously a lot of kids walking the same halls, reading the same books and sitting in the same curbs, and they're also hungry. Now, when you put that reality and add COVID, personally, my dad survived he fought COVID for 85 days. I've seen it firsthand, what it means to have someone on a ventilator, what it means to not understand what the news, how to navigate the health system. So my opinion to you comes as that kid who sat at the curb of McDonald's as a community leader who's leading over 500 families in Dallas with the same story that believes in education can give them a better life. Now, what I want to focus today are on 3 things, and I'm going to be hopefully time efficient. First of all, I've noticed how resourceful our community is. How resourceful our community is in the sense that anytime there's a food bank giving food, it's not about just that family getting food. It's about telling the neighbor. It's about sharing that knowledge and that information. Lo estamos repartiendo. Bueno, somos buenos para el chisme. And that's been a strength that I'm very proud of, to see how our community is relying on ourselves. How humble our kids are. And the reality of where there's kids who are sharing one computer with 3-4 kids in a family. And yet all they're asking is, our teachers, are they okay? When are things going to get better? Those are the 2 main points that I want to, again, refocus on. How resourceful our parents are being, how humble they are. And lastly, the reminder of how much we believe in the leadership and that role that the leaders in our community have, us, to really advocate and create access to those resources. Our community today, more than ever, are relying on us to be truthful with resources and information. And I'll leave it at that because I know we're running short on time. But again, the reality, I want to focus on the positivity of what our community is really demonstrating, how many times you can knock us down and we're going to get back up. And I want to hold on to that hope because that's what we got. We have each other. So muchas gracias, Tony. I love you guys. And thank you guys.
Spoken like a real campeón. He's a boxer, and you know that when you get knocked down, you're really measured in how you get back up. And Adan, everyone should look up Weather Network online and look up the work Adan's doing. We actually have worked with him very closely over the years, but if you go into his backyard, which is he's turned into an educational center and leadership institute, as well as going into the gym that he had started, you see hundreds and hundreds of kids K through 12 and even younger, in addition to their parents, that come to Puede Network for support. So thank you, Adan, for everything you do. Next up, I have Cara Lesser, who's from the mean streets of Bethesda, and she is the founder and CEO at the Kid Museum. She and I am proud to be on the board of the Kid Museum, and she is going to be discussing maker learning during COVID-19. Cara.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for including me in this and talk about resourcefulness and humility. That's two qualities that you certainly embody and bring to this work. I'm really privileged to partner with you on making a lot come to life, even in difficult times here. So I am Cara Lesser. I'm founder and CEO of an organization called Kid Museum that's based in Bethesda, Maryland, hometown for Antonio, Tijerino, home county for Carla Silvestre, who's on the call you'll hear from later, in the greater DC region, reaching a lot of kids in need in this moment with some really powerful learning experiences through hands-on maker learning in a time when we're all still trapped at home. Sorry, I'm going to ask whoever's running the slide just to go to the next slide. We covered this earlier, so I don't need to harp on it, just the incredible need of this moment. As Tony said at the outset, we're experiencing just such extraordinary setbacks in learning for kids going into this school year, and don't need to reiterate how much uncertainty there is about what school is going to look like and what out of school time looks like for kids going into this next year. You can go to the next slide. So as a maker space for kids, I want to get into a little bit how we're responding as an organization. Sorry, next slide. I'm a fast slide goer. So again, Kid Museum is a maker space that is focused on kids. We are the DC region's pioneering hands-on experiential learning and educational maker space. Everything we do is about inspiring kids to develop those skills for the future and a real mind of a maker. We'll go to the next slide. We really tap into a different kind of learning experience for kids, all learning through the eyes of a kid and their sense of possibility, their promise, their sense of potential to create a better world. We have all seen that in our own kids, in kids that we interact with in our lives, that we work through our organizations and in our communities, the power of how kids can imagine a better future. And all of our work in pre-COVID and during COVID times is about tapping into that energy and that capability that kids have to unlock new opportunities for all of us. Next slide. So we have approached this time in the mindset of a maker, just like our whole approach to working with kids, we've applied to our own organization. And we have pivoted completely to virtual programming, knowing that this is how we can best serve kids in this moment. Staying true to all of our core program design principles, we have focused on how we introduce kids to STEM and 21st century skills during this time where we can only access them through virtual means, but we can get them engaged in learning. Next slide. So we have rolled out a range of free family resources, as well as live stream virtual summer camp experiences and school programs that are deeply embedded with our local school system and led by professional educators. Again, all about hands-on project-based learning, which you can make happen across a computer screen. In fact, we are finding that the more traditional forms of learning is not what engages kids when they are at home, that we have to use that platform of reaching them through Zoom, through Google Meets, through whatever virtual platform, but really get them to a place where they are learning by doing. And that's everything that we've been focused on. Next slide. So what has really struck us and struck me as a parent and as an educator is that we have been able to keep alive those light bulb moments for kids during this time. And we need those light bulb moments now more than ever. We are partnering deeply with our local schools as well as community organizations to ensure that kids of diverse backgrounds have access to these creative, joyful learning experiences that can help them to continue to learn and grow even when we are stuck at home. So just briefly to note on that, we have a partnership with Montgomery County Public Schools, which is our local school system, this summer in 27 Title I schools, reaching between 3,000 and 4,000 students for a 3-day-a-week maker learning experience that is all delivered through virtual platforms in collaboration with teachers, but is really re-engaging our community in learning right now. Next slide. And that's, I guess, my last slide, which is please learn more at kidmuseum.org. We welcome opportunities to partner with individuals, organizations around the country, really looking to help be a resource for impactful learning right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara. And it's important for everyone to note, too, that this pandemic has also challenged us and allowed us to be national in our local work. So the work that Kid Museum is doing now can be something that can be leveraged all around the country. And I know that there's a clear focus on the Latino and African-American community as well as all communities. So next up, we have Oscar Romano, who is checking in from Houston, Texas, and he is with an ed tech startup co-founder, but he's also a former school principal. And he is going to be talking about leading a school in the midst of a pandemic.
All right. Buenas tardes. Gracias, Antonio and the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for having me. So, my name is Oscar Romano. I'm a current EdTech startup co-founder, former school principal. I was in education for 11 years, and I transitioned out this year to found an EdTech startup in the virtual learning space. But today I want to talk about my time leading a school through the pandemic. 3 years ago, I actually started my time as a school principal leading through Hurricane Harvey. And just last month, I ended my time leading through COVID-19 closures. So I want to share my experience as we transition to virtual learning. So let's set the scene. It's 6 p.m. Wednesday, March 11th. I'm on a call with system leaders at Yes Prep Public Schools here in Houston, Texas. And we're learning about how we're getting ready to plan for potential closures. It's scary, nerve-wracking, because I have 1,100 students, 100 staff members to consider. About 99% of my students are Latino or Black, and nearly all of them are in low socioeconomic status. I knew they'd be hit hard by the virus by any closure, and we're assuming that we're going to have school on Thursday and Friday before we head off to spring break, but we're planning for the worst and assuming that won't be the case. And while districts start to close all around the country, we're not ready to announce closures yet. We're working on contingency plans for different scenarios. We want to make sure that we're ready. Because a closure is never ideal, because we know the role that a school plays in a student's life. At the same time, even a mild case of COVID-19 can be devastating in low-income communities where access to affordable healthcare can be inconsistent, and trust in the government just really isn't that strong. So the decision to close isn't an easy one to make. But then the MBA shuts down. And for me, that was really eye-opening. The dominoes start falling, one after the other across the country. Things are getting real scary. So we move forward with our plan with our students, staff, and family safety at the forefront of our minds. At this point, closure is inevitable because that's what's best for our students. But knowing that, we think about the basic needs our students require to be academically successful at home. On Thursday, teachers are responsible, this is Thursday, March 12th, teachers are responsible for helping students familiarize themselves with their new portal, login information. Administrators, we're going from class to class to support the process. We tell teachers and students this is a precautionary measure. Don't worry, we don't know anything yet. We just want to make sure we're ready. Nothing's guaranteed. And yet, earlier in that day, school leaders did find out we won't be opening on Friday. We just didn't want to create more chaos. So I scheduled a meeting with my staff that afternoon and update them on our status. But the reality is I didn't know too much. No one did. And so I pushed staff to assume the worst. Worst case scenario is that we won't be back this year, is what I tell them. Not only did we close on Friday, but we didn't open for the rest of the year. Who knows when students around the country will be able to see full-time in-person instruction again. But in that time, I learned a few key lessons I want to share with you. One, it starts with empathy. Nobody knows what anyone's going through, thinking or feeling. And our students may not even be able to process everything going on in their lives at the moment. Next, relationships are even more foundational during virtual learning. The teachers who had the strongest relationships with students before the closure were the ones who had the highest assignment completion rates when we were closed. It was amazing to see. Third, aligned, consistent, and clear communication is critical. Students and parents look to schools for updates because they didn't want to get left behind. And it is up to the schools to do right by them and up to parents to ask for this, to ensure that they're communicating appropriately and to ensure that parents are getting the right information when they need it. Fourth, you need to meet students and families where they're at. So in my role, I empower 2 of my teachers to manage our social media pages and provide updates and help desk style support through avenues that align to student and family preferences. Our students loved asking for help via Instagram stories or Facebook stories. That was more aligned to how they receive information and how they ask for information. And then last, consistent check-ins are critical to have real-time data on where students and their families stand. And I'm not just talking about academic data. We were able to be more strategic with our engagement with students when we knew where they stood. Just because they had internet access one month didn't mean they had internet access the next month. Just because they had a device that worked doesn't mean that they ended up that during that time period with the device that worked. So we needed to know what they needed, when they needed it. During a global pandemic, we do need to assume the worst and plan from there. And that's what I encourage everyone to think about when we think about the kids that are going through this. Assume that they're undergoing stress, that they don't have as much time to complete work, that they're constantly distracted, that they have a lot of outside responsibilities. And nothing's going to be perfect, so it's important to meet them where they're at. And like I said, we got to think about empathy, relationships, communication, meeting people where they're at, and consistently checking in. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks again, Tony. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Oscar. And it's always wonderful to see somebody that I knew when they were 18 years old as a freshman in college, and to see them turn into this great spokesperson for our community and also for the educational system. Makes me real proud. I love how you have El Salvador right next to Harvard behind you.
Always. Thank you.
Next up is my dear friend, Otha Thornton, who's from Atlanta, Georgia. He was the 53rd National PTA president when he took over in 2013, and was actually the first Black man to be president of the National PTA. I was very proud to have served as a board member with him and for him. And he will be talking about navigating education during the COVID-19 pandemic. Otha.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for having me here today. And I want to use basically some basic things as we navigate this. And I can tell you that this has personally impacted my family. My 30-year-old daughter that lives in the Hispanic community in Houston, Texas, is recovering right now from COVID-19. With that being said, as parents during this time, with this uncertainty and just everything going on right now, it will be so important that we really work very hard to be role models and to just try to help provide comfort and to our children in spite of what's going on in our lives. As we know through child development and child psychology, from birth to 7 years old is a critical time in a child's development that goes on into their adulthood. And it's going to be very important that we, again, do our best to provide, to the best of our ability, the basic needs and provide them that sense of belonging that they need to survive this particular pandemic. I understand that parents are out of work right now. So again, you have shelter and food insecurity. I know here in some parts of Georgia, they put moratoriums on evictions during this time. And one of the concepts I do like about parts of Georgia here, and I know here in Atlanta, we actually have farmers and YMCAs working with communities and providing fresh vegetables at least once a week to families. And I encourage you all to look at your faith centers in whatever cities or towns you're in that are providing food to help compensate for our children not being in schools. I can tell you I'm oldest of 7, and from a single parent household, and we used to dread sometimes the summer's coming because we did not have those regular meals. So it's very important that we think about that. Stress about financial and health issues. Again, there's a lot of anxiety and depression going on, and child abuse has actually gone up now during this pandemic season. And I would tell you, parents, do your best to, with yourself and with your children, to set 1 or 2 goals for each day just to get through that day. And that will be important. And as those goals accumulate, it will help us navigate through this pandemic. And we understand PTA is working very hard around the country. Although we would like for schools to open up, we want to make sure that, again, the science and things are supporting it so that kids won't get sicker, and it's done when it's safe to get kids back to school. But we're working with Congress on that and ensuring that we're getting funding for schools that can open. Dealing with educating your child during this pandemic is very important that you really look closely at the television and radio time that they're listening to. They call it a television program and radio programs for a reason. It's usually within the popular culture, but again, let's just try to focus on, if you can, educational TV to try to help compensate for some of the losses that they're having in education. I worked with the PBS Advisory Board, Dora the Explorer and other television programs, and content was very important. So please be very intentional about what your kids are focusing their time on in television and also in radio. It's going to be very important. Make sure they're getting outside, getting some fresh air. I tell kids, music is food for the soul. What are they listening to during this time? It's going to be very important. And take this time to get to know your child better. And I'm going to close with this. At least one time a day, preferably dinner, try to sit down with your children and just talk about today and talk about what they learned today. I tell people, if a child is only educated at school, they're half educated. So education begins at home. So let's try as parents and role models to take advantage of this time to spend with our kids, being empathetic to understand that parents are struggling. So that being said, I thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Otha. That's very powerful. If a child is only educated at school, they're only half educated. So let me go on to the next Charla speaker, and it is Carla Silvestre, representing Rockville, Maryland, and Guatemala. She is a school board member at Montgomery County Public Schools. Her discussion will be All Means All, examples of a school system's handling of the pandemic. And I'm looking forward to hearing this because my kids are in this county. So I want to know what's about to happen as well.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed hearing what everyone's doing all over the country as we go through this crisis. I have a lot of slides, not a lot, but I'll go through them quickly. Next slide. I did want to start saying that I am the parent of 2 kids in our system, a rising 8th grader and one that just graduated. So I'm anxiously awaiting what's going to happen as she transitions to University of Maryland. So as just has been stated, we're in Montgomery County, Maryland, just outside of DC. We are a county of over a million residents, and we're the 14th largest school system in the United States. Next slide. I want you to focus on the chart on the right. We are 31% Latino, and you can see the change from 20 years ago when we were 15% Latino. 17% ESOL, were 6% 20 years ago, and the farms rate, our free and reduced meals, is 37% now, where 20 years ago it was 22%. And most of those are free meals, to tell you the severity of the poverty. Next slide. So in March, the governor ordered our schools to close for emergency closure for 2 weeks, and that ended up being the school buildings closed till the end of the school year. And we had remote learning for all those months. Next slide. Really kicked into gear, as has been stated, the need for our kids to be able to eat. With that many kids in receiving free and reduced meals, we knew it was imperative that we mobilize our staff and volunteers to distribute food. So 51 distribution centers was the last number we counted before we closed for the summer. And over 3.6 million meals have been distributed. We distributed lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Next slide. Chromebook distribution. 80,000 Chromebooks were distributed. Fortunately, our classrooms were equipped with Chromebooks, so we were able to give those out. 5,000 MiFi devices, and the Comcast Internet Essentials program, which is a national program you might be familiar with, was made free so that everyone could sign up for it. But I would say that this was one of the biggest barriers that we had. We can give out Chromebooks, but we are not an internet provider. So getting our kids internet access was one of the greatest challenges. And I'm going to talk about some advocacy points at the end related to that. Next slide. Next slide, I'm going to skip this for the interest of time. Engagement. 89.6% of our students engaged with their teacher at least 3 times a week. And for those that didn't engage, why didn't they? They told us there's just too much going on at home. I just can't help my child do the online learning. Fear of immigration, needing to be in the shadows right now. Did not want to connect with anyone, really being in the shadows. Didn't understand what it was that the system was offering with this online instruction. And early on, as I stated, that challenge of getting people connected to the internet. Next slide. This is how our engagement looks by race and ethnicity. You know, everything we do, we really keep track of who we're reaching. 88% of our Latino students, Latino students connected at that rate, 88%. Next slide. Recognizing that connecting with a teacher 3 times a week is not ideal, the system launched a summer school program free for everyone on top of our normal summer school program. Started this week and offering math and English language arts at all the levels and a wide array of enrichment classes like those offered by the Kid Museum so that kids could have a summer camp experience. Recognizing that, as Tony said, that is very limited right now. And we hope to have some kids in buildings by the end of August. Next slide. Plans for the future, Tony? We're opening, everyone's going online, school online as of August 31st. And parents can choose whether they want to stay with all online for the semester or once it's safe to open, 2 days a week in person for the rest of the semester, and then the rest of the week online. Next slide. I wanted to talk about some advocacy points. Now is not the time to cut funding for schools, not at the local level and not at the federal level. The feds allocated $13 billion for all schools in the country. That's not enough. We really need to advocate on a national level to make sure that we get the funding that we need. We need expansion of broadband so this internet access problem it doesn't get worse. And we have to treat the laptop like a textbook. We wouldn't send a kid home without a textbook. Now all school systems need to budget for laptops for every student. Next slide. And that's all. I'll just leave you with a beautiful picture of what we hope to return to, our children connecting both socially, emotionally, but also educationally. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Karla, and thank you for the work that you do as a school board member. That is a critical platform for our community and representation that we don't always have. We talk about lack of representation in every other industry, but that's an area, a field that we really need representation in the educational space. And in terms of our school system, we're very lucky. We're in one of the safest parts of the country right now. And I'm still worried about sending my kids back to school. So you could imagine what it's like in Florida or in Arizona, where my sister has COVID because she's a frontline worker and she contracted it. And they're actually pushing her to go back to work while she's still positive. But that's a whole nother Charla. But that's what's happening over there right now. So next up is Patrick Wu, who is coming to you from Lansdowne, Virginia. He's a senior educational advisor at the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation and a colleague of my good friend, Cecilia Marshall. And he will be discussing strategies for keeping students engaged through the pandemic. Patrick, you've got 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Antonio, and thank you to the Hispanic Heritage Foundation for having me today. So as you can see on your screen right now, the Cooke Foundation is a scholarship organization that serves high-achieving students with financial need from all across the country. We do so through 3 scholarships: the Young Scholars Program, where students apply in 7th grade. We work with them from 8th through 12th grade. That's a program that I work with, and I'm going to talk mostly about because I know that most of the parents on today are going to have middle school or high school students, some elementary as well, I know. We also do have undergraduate transfer scholarships, so if any parents there have children who are in community college, want to transfer to a 4-year school, we do offer up to $40,000 a year for the last 2 to 3 years of college at a 4-year institution. And then we also have a college scholarship program. So if any of you all are working with rising seniors, our college scholarship will actually open next month. That's a great thing to do if you're looking for something to do at home with your kids who are rising seniors, is to start looking at scholarships. And that scholarship is for up to $40,000 a year for all 4 years of college as well. So you can definitely take a look at our scholarships on our website later. But if we can go to the next slide, I want to go ahead and share what our focus has been as advisors for our students. So like I said, we support students all across the country from 8th grade all the way through graduate school. So the challenges that we've been seeing have been rampant throughout every state and city you can think of, every school, public, private, homeschool students, and then same with colleges. So we've kind of focused on 4 things. One is the consistent advisor and community outreach and support. So I'm glad that I heard, Oscar talked about this and Karla talked about this, but the frequent check-ins are really big. And so all the advisors here have been checking in with our students on a regular basis. And so one thing that we kind of push our students to do too is, even if you're not a scholarship student through our organization, a good practice, I used to teach for 6 years, and I'm actually going back to the classroom. Today's my last day at the Cooke Foundation. I'm going to go back and teach in DC this fall. And one of the things that I've also taught my students is you can't just have one advisor. What you really need is a board of mentors. So even before the pandemic hit, I felt that most of the students that we work with were in a good place because I knew that they had 4 or 5 caring adults in their lives already identified for when they needed help. So whether that's a counselor at school, a teacher, an administrator, a church leader, a coach, right? Having those caring adults in your child's life, I think, are key. Some of the students came to me as soon as the pandemic hit. Some of them didn't, and that was okay because I knew that they had a good support system. And through that support system, we really prioritized mental health. And I'm glad that some of the other panelists talked about that too. I think that's really important to focus on because without mental health, you can't do the schoolwork. And so kind of prioritizing that both in a one-on-one model, but also in a community model, because I think a lot of our students benefited from hearing from their peers. I think one of my favorite lines I've heard during this pandemic is that just because we're physically distancing doesn't mean we have to socially distance ourselves. And I think our scholars really benefited from having that peer group, kind of supporting each other, having near peer mentors in their lives as well. And I saw Henry posted a question about this too. And I would encourage you, if you can be a mentor in the life of people outside of your own children, I think that's such an important skill and such an important thing you can do. So thank you, Henry, for posing that question. And then within the scholar community, we've had hangouts where the scholars share free resources. So that's kind of the second point, where I know a lot of parents and students right now are doing things from Khan Academy to Rosetta Stone, things like that, and kind of consolidating that and talking with each other about which free resources are the best to use right now. And we found that our scholar community has kind of come together to learn how to code or program together or develop a website or practice their languages. And so that goes to the third point, which is this online summer programming piece. So traditionally through our scholarship, every single one of our students gets a paid residential summer program at a college campus or overseas. Obviously, that's not happening this year. Some of our students have elected to do online summer classes that we're paying for, but a lot of them are doing a lot of free stuff this summer. We challenged all of our students to kind of find what they could in their community. So we have students who are challenging themselves to, read 20 books by the end of the summer. Some of them have taught themselves how to sew so they can sew masks and donate them to your community. I love what Cara talked about, where with that makerspace right now, you don't want everything to be online with the students too, right? Giving students things that are hands-on. I had a student who collected plastic bags because he's an environmentalist. So he, found them all in his community that were going to be thrown out and built a tent in his backyard that he can sleep in, right? So students are very creative and using this time and creative space to get them to challenge themselves to learn something that they might not learn in the classroom has been really big. We have students who have started book clubs with each other, and they log on once a month to talk about books. They just did one with 1984 and Lies My Teacher told me, which was really powerful in this moment right now. And then we also have language circles, which is really exciting. So I just was in one where I got to sit in on students practicing Mandarin Chinese, and none of them were Mandarin speakers to begin with. And they were just practicing, or, Spanish speakers who want to practice their Spanish with other students, or we also have a French language circle going on with our students. So these are all free things that you can do for online summer programming. And as you've probably heard from many different school districts, that might need to continue into the school year too. So even if your child is at home during the school year, I would encourage you to find these opportunities to connect with other students and find ways that you can still do programming for them. The last point that I have is just emergency funding. And so one thing I think is really important as well to realize, and some people have talked about advocating for more funding from your school, for your school districts and things like that. But through CARES Act, right, if you have a student in college, most colleges got money to help their neediest students right now. But a lot of students don't know that. So some of our college students came to us at the beginning of the pandemic asking us for help. And we said, go back to your college. They have emergency resources, or find other community-based organizations or businesses in your area that want to help. Some of you may know, a lot of internet companies started offering free internet in certain communities for people who are under a certain income group, or a reduced price at least. So looking for those emergency funds, I think, is really big. And thank you, Antonio. Last slide, I'll just throw up just so you all can see if you're interested in learning more about our scholarships.
Thanks very much. Next up is Rebecca Medina-Pleitez, who's checking in from Los Angeles, California. She is a great friend, not just of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, but also an amazing parent and community leader. Rebecca is the Deputy Director at the California Primary Care Association, and she will be talking about back to school during COVID-19 on the fence. Rebecca.
Yep. Hi, Tony. Hi, everyone. So I have to share that, right, Patrick, right as you were wrapping up your presentation, I heard my 10-month-old crying, and I rushed to go check in on her. And I think that this is a classic example of what working parents, if you will, that now have children at home are going through, is you're, straddling both worlds, which is incredibly overwhelming. I want to share, my personal story and how COVID-19 has impacted my family, and of course, thinking about our children going back to school. So let me start by sharing that we have a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 10-month-old, and a baby on the way that is due in October, which is when our kids are expected to go back to school. However, I'm in Los Angeles, and our school district here, LAUSD, is not essentially allowing kids to go back to school. I think as of today, 32 school districts or 32 counties will not allow children to go back to school. There's one county, which maybe you are familiar with, Orange County, that is pushing for schools to open. And, as Tony, as you shared, we are on the fence. I think this is no surprise to a lot of us who are parents who are very concerned about kids, going back to the classroom, all sorts of questions that are just running through our minds. What will, the social distance look like? What is the classroom setup going to look like? I think I'll just go out on a limb here and say that I think most of us, my fellow panelists and maybe folks who are joining, we are lucky, we are privileged in that we can afford to think about these issues, right? These problems, thinking through what these things will look like. There are a lot of folks in our communities who don't have that luxury. And I think as much as this has hit us personally, my family, I do think about those kids who are really struggling, who, as many have already mentioned, do not have access to broadband, who don't have access to a laptop. We're lucky that a lot of the school systems here did provide that for children, but not having Wi-Fi or spotty Wi-Fi still does not allow you to have the proper resources. And so I definitely am thinking about those kids and those families. I'm thinking about us. And, in my day job, Tony, I think you said this, spot on. This is definitely another charla. I work for an association, the California Primary Care Association, and we represent essentially all of the community health clinics in the state of California, 1,300. And we know, numbers don't lie, that Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And, when I think about those families, I think about those parents, I think about the essential workers. I mean, the kids, I just can't help but think about their mental health. And I see it in my 4-year-old. I see it in him missing his friends. I see it in him missing the important adults in his life, his school teachers. And I think that we haven't begun to reckon with what the mental health toll is going to look like, what it has begun to look like. I think I'm not there yet. I'm personally still thinking about trying to, have a system that will allow some type of learning in our home environment. I do want to share, and Otha, I want to thank you for sharing with us, I think, something very important, which is, taking things one day at a time. I shared that right before jumping on. My 10-month-old was crying. And so that alone is anxiety producing, right? Can you imagine jumping on and speaking on a call, and then your 10-month-old is crying, your 3-year-old is, over here on your leg, and the other one's on your back. I mean, this is really tough for parents, right? And it's incredibly tough for kids because I'm not in their heads, but I know that they're struggling is why I see it in them. And so I think taking things one day at a time is very valuable. It's very simple, but very, very valuable. Last 2 weeks ago, I did an activity with the kids where we, bought, they're called orugas in Espanol. What are they? The little hungry caterpillar. Help me out here. What are the orugas called in English? Caterpillars. Thank you. We bought little caterpillars from a website called Insectlore, insectlore.com. For any parent who is joining us today who is interested in doing this activity with your kids, it was wonderful. We stretched this activity out for like a 2-week period. And we read, the hungry caterpillar. We drew caterpillars. We talked about capullos and how the capullos turn into butterflies. The butterflies stayed with us for about a day or two. We fed them. And then we just let them out into the wild. And we talked about, it was just about the butterflies and the life cycle. And it was a wonderful activity. Of course, our kids are on the younger end. But I have to tell you that I've struggled, right, with thinking about the activities that we can do so that our kids don't fall behind. I also think that it is very overwhelming for parents because
All right, Rebecca, I think you're frozen up a little bit here, my friend. But I think you were wrapping up, so I don't think the timing is horrible. Let me go on to Kwasi, what am I saying? Kwasi Asare is zooming in from Chapel Hill. I know how to pronounce your name after all these years. He is the head of channel sales and marketing at DigitalOcean after working at Amazon in their educational division. He was also a Department of Education when I met him during the Obama administration. He is going to share personal experiences during COVID-19, and he has been a friend to the organization and to me personally for many years. So, Kwasi, what you got?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Antonio. But all the same, thank you, and thanks HHF for the invitation to participate in this charla. So, muchas gracias y buenas tardes. Mi español no es bueno, pero trato. But more importantly than some of the things that have been said, more importantly than any of the things that have been said so far, I'm a dad, and I apologize in advance. My son may bomb our session, and I've long since surrendered and given up. It's not my world, it's his. So you've been warned. Maybe the slides are just not going to advance, but I'll just speak to what's happened all the same. So I guess I'm here because I've been lucky enough to have met Antonio in a past life when I worked for the administration. I do want to share a little bit of a story of the time that I've had, and maybe some of it would be some benefit to some of you guys. So my story doesn't necessarily begin in this country. And some of you or your parents or grandparents may know that immigrant story too. I was lucky enough to get some skills for resiliency that are timeless regardless of what's going on in the world. And I think that's very pertinent now to today. The skills that I think I learned in each generation from my grandfather, my father, to me, I think can help us all. And now it's not just philosophy that's being tested, but when I added an additional line of lineage with the birth of my own son, it no longer just becomes idea or theory. For any parents, it's real. It's not just an exercise and ideology. All that goes out the window. You actually have to invest in your own. So the crux of the matter is, we should be thinking about how we can take advantage, of this crisis. In our own home, we discovered our son was actually progressing, learning along faster than he was in school. And because as parents, we can actually provide a more one-to-one learning environment. Benjamin Bloom has already, shown us that one-to-one instruction can move kids' learning by 2 standard deviations. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's painful with our kids at home. But also the good thing is they can't get lost in the group setting, when they're with you, because nobody cares about your kid, more than you would. And I would say we can focus on a few things in terms of literacies that are not taught in school. The first is digital literacy. I think it's really, really important now because we are being bombarded with alternative facts, fake news, and social media disinformation at a precedent which probably hasn't been seen since World War II. And our kids need to be able to discern what they're reading, what they're hearing, ask deeper questions about why they're seeing what they're seeing, who benefits from it, and why it's being presented in a certain way. So don't just sit back and accept the programming that's coming to us from CNN, Fox News, or Facebook and just accept it as fact. So it's important that they think through and they comb through that information and that they're able to discern for themselves. Secondly, in this economic crisis that we're looking at, please teach our kids financial literacy. Believe me when I tell you that there are people making money when the economy is going down, and there are people making money when the economy is going up. But understand what that means to participate, in capitalism, which is where we reside, right, wrong, or different. Maybe that's a conversation for another charla. But participating means having a great understanding of finance and numeracy and literacy there, so we keep our money in our pockets, in our communities. And then last, I think it's also important that we also understand our basic, literacy, which is the things that we work with at home. And I think Otha made some observation of that. So try and turn off the TV as much as we possibly can and be a partner to our kids, so that, that they can also learn and advance, when they get to school. And although my presentation didn't show it, I'll include in the sidebar some references to some tools that I think can be helpful, particularly because of the challenges that we're in right now. Broadband, I worked on it a lot, so I know a lot of things that some of the other panelists have shared is problematic. So hopefully for some of us that do have the power of this little device that's in our pocket, there's some things there that we can do on our mobile devices. And there's some tools that are accessible on our mobile phones that can help our kids learn to complement the great work that our heroes, our teachers, are doing in the classroom to try to help teach our babies. So help our heroes, help our teachers by helping our kids. And there are a few links I can certainly share with you guys. And I think if we all do these things the right way together, we can make sure that we can help our kids step up into our shoes and make this a more perfect union. Entonces, muchas gracias, HHF.
That is an example of a strong Charla. Thank you, Kwasi, and came in on time too. So appreciate that. Really strong recommendations as well on the personal side, as well as bringing up issues that we continue to tackle in our communities collectively, right? We're always 1 and 2, unfortunately, in terms of African American and Latino. So next up is Dr. Sylvia Reyna, who is checking in from San Antonio, Texas, and she is a board member of the National PTA, and we'll be discussing advocating for all children, every child's potential, a reality. And we'll have one more speaker, and we'll actually be done on time. So, Dr. Reyna, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio, for this opportunity to be part of this charla. I'm coming to you as an advocate, current board member of the National PTA, as you said, and a Latina, a retired school district administrator, a university professor, a mother, and a family engagement specialist. So let's hope that I can share a little tidbit or two. First of all, PTA's utmost priority during this time continues to be the health and safety of all of our members and our students, educators, the families that we serve, and the staff that teach our children. Unfortunately, this pandemic has really laid bare the longstanding systemic health and social inequities suffered by our Black and Brown and Native communities. And we know that we're at a real devastating point right now of an increased risk of our communities getting COVID-19 and experiencing that severe illness, regardless of the age. And National PTA and PTAs across our country are really working hard every day to help school communities navigate the challenges that have arisen from the pandemic, and focusing on the social and emotional well-being, and making sure that that social and emotional well-being is addressed, and looking at the food insecurities that so many of our children are facing, finding the resources for family engagement that so many of our guests have already spoken to, and looking for the greater support that they need for the distance teaching and learning, and bridging that digital divide that we know that 9 to 12 million of our students across the country are facing. Also, some of the teachers are facing that. They don't have that broadband access and needing to solicit that kind of support from our government, having to fund the kinds of resources that are necessary in our schools. And our association understands that reopening our nation's schools in pre-K through 12th grade is really going to depend on the funding that's necessary to make sure that we have that continuity of education. And while we certainly don't want to bypass the necessity to get our children back into school, it cannot outweigh the necessity for us to look at the safety of our children, to make sure that we're taking care of the mental and the physical health of our students and the employees and the families. And while we've been encouraged with the kind of efforts that our House of Representatives and all of our legislators have placed within the HEROES Act, we need more. We need more in our schools, and our Congress needs to act right now. And so we come to everyone right now speaking with that voice of advocacy. We want to make sure that we're looking at the health, the safety, the infrastructure. It's got to be immediate. It also has to look long-term. We have to look long-term at the physical, the psychological, the social, the emotional needs of students, the educators, and we need to look not only for, like I said, the upcoming school year, but then the long-term. We have always worked with woefully under-resourced packages within our school system, and the returning to school is this time right now that we need to look at what can schools look like in the future, the post-pandemic era. And we're calling on everyone right now to look at dedicating those resources and connecting the internet that we need to look at that emergency funding for family engagement, looking at the funding for students with disabilities. Let's not threaten our families now about cutting those kinds of resources. Let's look at the increased funding for Title I to address those losses and learning that we know occurred since March and before then. Look at the increases in Title I. Look at the increasing in the nutritional programs to prevent the hunger and the insecurities in funding of food that we know is facing our families right now. Look for the increases in how we are going to deliver the food and all the new models that we have to look at that our schools are facing in just the social distancing, and how is it that we're having to deliver to those households where we have how is it that we're getting to all those multiple households that we haven't thought about in the past that we're having to do now in a long-term situation. Lastly, any decisions that we go about in reopening our schools has to involve the very households and the families that are being impacted. They have to be inclusive of all of the voices out there. We need to talk to public health experts. We need to think about implementing plans that impact individuals, diverse individuals. We can't have our politicians making the decisions for the individuals that are impacted. Effective stakeholder engagement has to be transparent, providing multiple opportunities for input so that that they are meaningful decisions that are clear and concise and communicated to everyone. I do want to just let everyone know that we have launched a comprehensive web page that is pta.org/COVID-19. It has resources, tools, and information that support families and educators amid the pandemic. As you can see, we need everyone working together to support our students, our teachers, and families. PTA stands ready to work with everyone. We thank you for the opportunity for us to be with you today. Please go to our website. We have resources for every age level from pre-kinder to 12th grade in both languages, English and Spanish. It has creative ideas for families to engage in educational activities. It has different modes of delivering instructional information as well as magazine information. It has it in webpage format. It has podcasts for families to engage in. So please go and know that PTA at your local schools are those resources that families can use to help bridge that gap for any loss of learning that may have occurred, that we know has occurred. And please use your PTAs, your local PTAs, and advocate for your children and be that partner that we know every family needs right now, especially those Latino and marginalized families.
Thank you so much.
Please. Thank you. Thank you.
And Dr. Reyna, thank you also for representing our community on the board. I was on the board with Otha back in 2013, and I can tell you it comforts me to know that you're there holding it down. So finally, we are going to hear from Dr. Ana Sierra, who's from our nation's capital and is the founder and executive director at Ana Sierra Counseling/Consejería, PLLC. Her perspective is critical right now. And I have to tell you that I have seen my own and other children have panic attacks during this time. And so it's important to not just lay out what families are going through and what children are going through and what parents are going through, especially in those hard hit areas and where the surges are right now, but just in general, how to better support our children through their emotional and mental health as they come out of 6 months to now, who knows how much longer. There's just been no end in sight. It's not like a cycle has been just a few weeks. This is an ongoing thing where we don't know where it's going to end. So please, I'm turning it over to Dr. Ana Sierra, and then I will close it out.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm really grateful to be part of this space. I am definitely have been working with families here in the DC area during this time of the pandemic. And in my presentation, what I wanted to emphasize is that parenting right now is challenging. It's really hard to do everything that you need to do for your child's well-being. Not impossible, but really challenging because we're living through a global trauma. Let's not forget that the pandemic is a traumatic event that we all have been experiencing some sort of emotional turmoil. There's an increase of family conflict. There's an increase of child even abuse cases out there. Not in a sense, it is something nobody was prepared for at this time. So, and I want to talk about our children. 1/3 of Hispanics are children, so we are talking about a huge population. I'm gonna just give you some indicators and some of the things that you can look out for to see how your children are reacting to things. And until I get the next slide, I just wanted to also talk about how in our culture, in our Latino culture, there's not really an ongoing custom of talking about emotions. We don't talk about emotions. We talk about what we need to get done. How do we get ahead? How do we overcome? We're very resilient as communities. We are the most resilient community. We're hardworking. But talking about our feelings is something that it's very foreign. So one of the things that it is very important to remember is that this kind of trauma that we are experiencing can impact the child's development. It can interrupt it from where it would have been if this wouldn't have happened. So we have to put in a lot more of our parents' hats on, at the same time trying to take care of ourselves. Some of the things that you can see in children is that they express emotions differently. They are not going to be like adults. They don't talk to us the same way. They behave in different ways. So some children are showing a little bit more of behavioral acting out, which could be in an aggressive manner or in a more defiant with parents. And this can be felt more because of the stress that is happening out there with COVID and with the uncertainty with school and missing their friends, not knowing if they're going to be safe, thinking about their parents' safety a lot. Some children are coping by isolating a lot. They're sleeping more. I know I have children in my practice that sleep all the way up to 12 to 16 hours, and that's something that you have to look out for as an indicator that they may be struggling. Also, an increase of technology use. If they do have the privilege of having technology, they are spending so much time on that they're distracted from their own ability or opportunities to connect with the family, with the friends, or with the nature, doing activities that are safe. They're not able to do those things. Difficulties with family members, poor hygiene. Maybe they don't want to shower as much as they used to. And emotional numbing, which really boils down to the child not being able to enjoy the day-to-day things that they usually would enjoy. So if you know that your child really loves something and you provide that for them, their emotional reaction is not the same as it was before. So you as a parent can better understand your child and read your child to see that difference. And how do we support those indicators that I spoke about? Before intervening, before even any recommendations, just remember that you guys as parents that are listening in here, you're trying to put the mask on the child on the plane. Remember, like putting your mask first. You're trying to put the mask on your child right now before placing it on yourself, because we're in a pandemic. We're acting in fear, right? We're acting with that survival mode. Not that we've forgotten about ourselves much, but we're trying to take care of the child before. But we have to take care of ourselves as adults, as parents, making sure that you do a lot of self-care, that you are putting yourself and your mental health, giving that space throughout your day. So before any kind of intervention, that parents really need a lot of care right now. They need support right now. So find those networks of support. For children, spending time together, quality time. I believe Otha Thornton talked about how we need to have those conversations with children, spending time, quality time, values, reevaluate your values. Because a pandemic can disrupt development, it can also shape character. So you want to go ahead and get in touch with your values as a family. Talk about it together. Make time for each other so that your children can stay on track as of who they are, where they're going in life, and what family means to them, and what are they, so they don't lose track of who they are in this process. And also helps you as a parent to reconnect with those things. Consistency with them, discipline, that is that is expectations of what needs to happen throughout the day. Structure. Children went from going to a classroom in the morning, then at a certain time they break for another class, and then they go to recess, and then they break for another class, and then they come home. They had structure before. A pandemic just forced all of us to lose that structure. We need to have built that structure again, because the brain works best when we know what's coming next and what's the next thing we can do. So those are just some really broad things you can do to take care of children even more now. And let's be kind to children. They are little people that are going through a lot, trying to figure out the world and trying to figure out how you are taking, they're seeing you as well. They worry about you. Kids in therapy do tell me, I worry about my mom and my dad. They're, and that's their main worry, because they're not because you're causing it, but because they see you as an adult to give them that reassurance. And so put yourself first. The kids love it when their parents take care of themselves. And they actually love to see that parents are doing the best that they can with themselves. And also, don't forget to just let them know that we're human. We're going to make mistakes, right? This is a pandemic. No one's figured it out. Psychologists have not studied this until now, with all the technologies we have not to study it. So be kind to yourselves and remind your family that we're going to make mistakes, but we know we love each other. So let's try to make this work, and let's put, everybody contribute to a plan so that we can make it through together. And also just wanted to, there's a mental health curve. So just as the COVID curve is spiked up and coming down, there's a mental health curve that right now is at the lower level. When things are starting to reopen and things try to go back to normal, there's going to be an increase on depression, anxiety, and difficulties for people, because right now we're all in survival mode in some way or another. We're trying to figure this out, trying to make the best. So the mental health curve is coming. Let's be ready for that. Let's build up right now. Let's put in new skills, learn new things to make sure that we're strong, so that we can prepare children for what's also coming.
Thank you so much. And I actually was taking notes while you were talking, because it's very important for us to be aware of all of these things, including how we're taking in the trauma affects our children, and they worry about us too. It's not just us worrying about them. So thank you everyone for joining us on this Charla. This is very, very important. Thank you to all of the oradores and oradoras for sharing their perspectives and ideas and resources and guidance. Also, thank you everyone that joined us. Thank you, Henry. I see you've been very active in the chat. And I really appreciate it from the Hispanic Heritage Foundation's team that does these Charlas every single week. And so everyone have a wonderful, safe weekend, and stay tuned for our next Charla. Thanks, everyone.